from the people of the snow, boy. That mean I thrive in the wintertime. Yeah, I'm what they call a savage kid. My family tree is bigger than the Old and New Testament. I put a fist up. That's word they calling Kaepernick. Somebody gotta stand for it. Tell them who you want. So beware, we black snake killers. Blackfish, I've been a killer. We're the ones you can't get rid of. Sound familiar? Yeah, long hair, that Ric Flair. Nature boy from the village. GE for really, really. You see, I don't rock and roll. Nah, I stand and rock. Yeah. I think there's something in the water. Here's some food for thought. Is it really a felony for wanting my water clean? Expect us not to rage against the machine. Ain't moving like Rosa P. Nope. You know why? Cause this dream catcher ain't catching your pipe dream. Word. Look what happened in Flint. No disrespect, but the same thing happens to village kids that sip water from the tap and are dying to live from the cancer it gives. Where's the state of emergency for them? I don't know. Act like you know the story. Broken treaties, unholy matrimony. One nation under the creator, homie. All my relations, many with Choni. Warriors, come out and play. Officers, we're here to stay. Put a fist to the sky if you ride with me. As long as I'm alive, I'll stand for this.
They be greasing their hands, shitting on our people while they stacking their bands. While they say we all equal, they don't look at us as people, all they see is our land. Believe in the cedar, we can leave it to beaver. True don't, motherfucker, man, we need a real leader. Middle fingers to the colorblind, no disrespect, but if you don't see color, you don't see me neither. Step in line, man. We invited Uncle Sam, got the shields held high, we'll be fine, fam. Yeah, we ready for war, don't cross the line in the sand. You'll be lying in the sand, boy, I die for my land, real talk. Look, I stand with the warriors. This land is who we are, we can let you destroy us. Until the people said, yo, bro, they can employ us. Look, man, it's not like I haven't noticed.
Hey, Quentin, I work for Tender Morgan, your apprenticeship of heavy duty mechanic. But we are looking, if you're interested, give me a call back as soon as possible. Thank you, bye.
To replay this message, press 1. To go to the message deleted. You have no more messages.
Tiny house, what up? If water is life, please fill me a cup so I can spill it on your face and wake your dumb ass up. Enough is enough, numb nuts, wake up. Yo, fuck Kinder Morgan, here's a Kinder surprise. Indigenous resistance, man, we got 9 lives. We put a life on the line, not a lifeline. I'll be damned if I see another broken pipeline.
Warriors, come out and play. Officers, we're here to stay. Put a fist to the sky if you ride with me. As long as I'm alive, I'll stand for this.
If the unceded land is your home, put your fist up, cousin, put your fist up. If you like your water clean yet alone, put your fist up, cousin, put your fist up. You know we're ready for war, we in a zone. Put your fist up, cousin, put your fist up. If you die for your land, let me know. Put your fist up, cousin, put your fist.
Hi, everybody. Sorry for the delay. We had some technical difficulties on our end.
Welcome to week 3 of our podcast. You know, water is life. Oneganos onat the daño. And today we have some new topics for you. Week 3 is all about systemic racism, solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement, and environmental racism. And also we're going to touch on what's happening currently on our own reservation of 6 Nations. And we have with us on this exciting new episode, we're going to have Tomas Lopez, who is a leader of the International Indigenous Youth Council. Our guest, Mr. John Williams, and he's part of Warrior Parks Athletics, and our Science Minute guest, Mr. Charles de Lannoy from the McMaster University, and he's a a chemical engineerist. So we
We
got
have
a
a pretty
really,
cool
yeah, we're gonna
lineup
have a pretty
here.
good lineup here. Yeah, pretty heavy today, but we'll try and keep it as
Light as possible.
easy. Yeah, we'll try to keep it easy as possible here.
Yeah, so our first guest is Tomas Lopez, and he's going to be talking about his work that he does protecting our land and our water, and he guides so many youth, and he's a great role model to look up to, and he does cool stuff all over the place. He's always traveling, and we would love to hear about more about what he has to say and what he's doing currently. So here's Tomas Lopez. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit? And don't skip all the cool parts that you do.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Makasha. Yaat ebene tlaso kumali ometeo niampetuaste. My name is Tomas Lopez Jr. My mother is Waterwoman Sharon Dominguez. My father is Sundance Chief Tomas Lopez Sr. And I'm one of many grandchildren of Chief of Chiefs Leonard Crodog Sr. I was born and raised in the US in Denver, Colorado, which people now call the weed capital of like the world. But while I've been living here, I mean, I experienced a lot of different things. I am a proud two-spirit person, and I really, since my adult life, I have really done my best to walk in my power. And no matter how hard it gets in this very masculine dominating world, and really understanding, coming to understand both my masculine and feminine power. So growing up in Denver, Colorado was really interesting because when I was young, I remember it being very predominantly Latino, Black, and Indigenous. And over the last 15 years, 20 years, we've experienced a very aggressive and violent influx of gentrification. And for those of you who don't know what gentrification is the act of uprooting a group of folks who are in a community and raising the prices to live, to eat, to be a member of that community, moving those poor, usually Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks out so that an upper echelon group of people can move in, and it then begins to become an upper class white dominant neighborhood. And so it was always really strange watching what seemed to be like a replay of American history happening to us. Our traditional neighborhoods being kind of ripped from our hands. And so I knew that there was always a problem and that I needed to educate myself, not only in terms of what Western society calls education, but also in terms of my traditional knowledge as well, that I needed to make sure that I had a very stern foot and rooting in both sides of that. And so I went to college and I graduated with a bachelor's degree in technical communications and a minor in Indigenous studies. And so when I graduated from college, I thought I was going to get this great job and that I was set. And I ended up working at American Apparel and just selling like clothes to people that really didn't need them. And it was a very unfulfilling way to like use all of this knowledge that I had collected over the past 5 years. And that was when I had heard about a group of young folks who were running from North Dakota to Washington, D.C. to deliver President Obama some letters and some petitions demanding that he honor his word and stop construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline. And soon they began to make a call to all folks to come and support them in stopping the construction of that pipeline. And I'm happy to say that I was one of the many, many people that answered that call. And when I got there, I just thought I was going to be, a 22-year-old, 23-year-old, just dropping off some supplies. And I ended up meeting the International Indigenous Youth Council, who really began to guide me and open my eyes to, the ways in which we could help our communities by teaching them that they have the right to clean water and clean air and clean earth and clean fire. And, that because we have a voice and because we have able bodies, that we can stand and be in between, our people, our lands, and these corporations and governments. And so when Standing Rock began to get smaller and not so much of that big concentrated camp, the folks in the youth council went outside, and we began to take all of the knowledge that we were given in Standing Rock to the communities at large. And we began to really just do the work that needed to be done in each one of our communities. The IIYC, as many may or may not know, was actually founded and led by women and Two-Spirit folks. And so, and it still is very much a queer safe space. And folks are able to, queer, trans, and Two-Spirit folks are actually able to claim power within these spaces. And so I've been really honored to be able to expand the reach, and now we have 8 chapters across Turtle Island, and we are continuing to expand like every month, it seems. About a month ago, though, things really started to change and escalate when the killing of George Floyd happened, and the Black Lives Matter movement began to escalate in a way that many people were almost unprepared for. And so I live in the heart of downtown Denver, and in one of the last affordable housing units in the city. And about 6 blocks away is the Capitol, which is where our front line really began to erupt. And I began to realize that I was being forced with a lot of the same traumas that I had faced in Standing Rock. The constant helicopters, the sound of gunshots, of people screaming, of people getting hurt, friends that that come and they have major bruises and what seems to be like could be internal bleeding. It was all just like this replay of what I had gone through in Standing Rock, but in my backyard. And I realized in that moment that our young urban Black, brown, and Indigenous folks were not prepared for that type of interaction with the police. They were not trained to go into these streets and treat them as a front line. When you're on these front lines, you must be very tactical. You have to be very, you can't just think about really yourself sometimes. You have to think about also the safety of the many people that are around you, because your actions don't just affect you in those moments, they affect everyone. And so we began to, we realized that, okay, like the youth grow up. And when youth grow up, they need something to go into. And so we began to create what we're calling the People's Action Collective here in Denver, where we are providing that nonviolent direct action training to young folks actively on the front lines. So we go to these different front lines and offer these trainings in real time. And a lot of these trainings and knowledges this knowledge that we received was given to us in Standing Rock from a lot of the groups that were there, helping us organize a lot of these actions. Groups like Indigenous Environmental Network, Indigenous People Power Project, NDN, Thunder Valley. These are all groups that have really stood by us, and Native Organizers Coalition really stepped forward. And so, Native Organizers Alliance, excuse me. And so we took a lot of that knowledge and we began to actively apply it to our youth and really our young folks here in Denver, to train them up to be prepared for what we had gone through in Standing Rock, and really allowing our femmes, our Black trans women, our Indigenous Two-Spirit folks to step into positions of leadership and to get some of the training that they need in order to continue moving and actually be the leaders and implement the change that we actually want to within our communities.
That's awesome.
Yeah, awesome. Can you tell us like what kind of training specifically, like is there any difference between the ones from Standing Rock to the ones in Colorado?
Honestly, no. I mean, they're pretty much identical. Like the first thing that we expect folks to do is take like Frontline Safety 101, which is just like basic, really common rules that we need to be knowing when we're on the front lines. Things like don't run, You know, like when you're surrounded by 1,000 people and everybody's running, it can be extremely dangerous. And, you know, people don't think about those things. You know, telling folks that if you have asthma, that being around pepper spray or tear gas can actually kill you. And so folks with severe asthma, you know, we have to ask them that maybe the front line isn't quite the spot for you. You know, we also teach them to map each other out. You know, a lot of times when we go into these with our community members are on different spectrums. Some folks are ready to go and charge the Capitol and break windows, and other folks are like, hey, we got to vote, and I just want to vote. And so one really big thing that we're actively trying to explain to folks is that voting and frontline revolting, they're the one and the same. You know, if you're just voting and you're not on these front lines helping the frontliners organize and giving, you know, what you have to those frontline actions, you're not utilizing the voting process in its fullest. And it's the same for the other way. If you're someone who's always on the front lines, but you're not doing the basic due diligence of showing up and voting, you're not actively utilizing the full power of frontline organizing. They are one and the same, and they have to move together in the same way.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it's so interesting how they're basically the same scenario, what happened in Standing Rock and then what happened in Denver in your backyard. That's crazy.
Yeah, I've actually come to find out that a lot of Tiger Swan, which was the anti-terrorist group in Standing Rock, most of the tactics that they use stem from the tactics that were used by the Denver Police Department in the 60s and 70s against the Chicano and American Indian movement. So it's really interesting to, like, especially for like my parents who were like a part of those movements, to see the ways in which these tactics have evolved and how we as the movement and as the youth have evolved with that. So that's been like a really interesting thing to kind of observe as well.
Yeah, earlier you were explaining that the elders and leaders were actually helping. Can you tell us like how they actually helped guide the youth back in Standing Rock?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we were in Standing Rock, I mean, the first, like, when we say like youth, we want youth to take power and we want youth to, you know, reclaim themselves and show up to these front lines. A lot of time what ends up happening is you get in these rooms with like the elders, and the elders don't actually see eye to eye with what the young people are seeing. And so it's usually this automatic like cut, no, like it's a no, that's not the traditional way of doing it. And we know the traditional way of doing things. When we were in Standing Rock, things panned out a little bit differently. A lot of us, honestly, we had respect amongst our elders. We, you know, in the youth council, although we believe that young people should definitely, you know, reclaim their power, we also understand that working with elders is one of the key parts of that. We just can't do this work without acknowledging the folks that were here long before us. And also realizing that, you know, when we say this generation, we're not just talking about people in between the ages of 15 and 25. We're talking about everybody who is living right now, the youngest person that's living and the oldest person. They are still a part of this fight and what we're doing. And so we ended up getting acknowledged by Makasha's father, Orville, who came to Standing Rock and presented the youth council with a sacred chanupa, or a sacred pipe, and in front of all of the people acknowledged us as leaders of our people, that young people had to be the ones involved in doing this. And that meant a lot to us. It gave us pride in what we were doing. It really told us that not only is what we're doing good for us and is good for our people and what we're doing, it's also good for us. You know, we're being validated, and that feels good in that way. And but also understanding that validation, like that is a reciprocal relationship that we have with elders. You know, it's not that we just want youth to be in power and that only youth should be making decisions and that adults should just be waiting for youth to give them the say so and they go. It's an intergenerational thing that we're working together. The respect is reciprocal, and the way that we see each other is on an equal level. You're not higher than me and I'm not higher than you.
Yeah, it's a very symbiotic relationship. You both have to have something that you both really do have something that they need. What you guys have is, the time, and what they have is the experience and the knowledge. That's really,
You all have important roles to play.
yes. There's all those different appointed, leaders and
Responsibilities.
responsibilities. Yeah. Responsibilities.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the
Um,
next question.
our next question, we want to know why, for our viewers here, why we call it the black snake. Some people might
So
know why.
yeah, I was talking to one woman, and she was telling me, in our tradition, we pray to the snakes. The snakes help us find things when we've lost certain things. And she says, and it's really unfortunate that, like, these black snakes, we don't want them to get mixed up with like our snakes, because snake medicine can be good medicine to some folks, to some places. And so when we're talking about the black snake, a lot of people are referring specifically to oil pipelines and what they're doing to the land. Personally, when I think of what the black snake is, I think it goes beyond just environmental. I think it's very much so the black snake represents the youth suicide rates in our communities. The patriarchy and how strong it is, our missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirit people. The black snake is the alcohol abuse, the drug abuse, the sexual abuse, all of these things that are very rampant in each one of our communities. No matter where you are, where you go, the black snake in that effect has been in our communities for a very long time. And so to me, sometimes it's not so much a metaphorical thing for the pipelines, but also a metaphor for the spiritual attack that we are under as Indigenous and as Black folks. And I think that oftentimes that battle and that aspect of these front lines isn't talked about either. It's very much so put on only this physical plane, when in all reality, there's a major spiritual warfare going on within these front lines themselves, which is why some folks, when you come home, they feel so drained for days. They can't do anything. And that's that spiritual warfare that's at play.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, very true. I used to work in a line of basically like education of our history and culturalism and stuff like that. And there was a group of kids that came from a police camp, and they left this very heavy feeling at my place of work there. Like they left happy, but they arrived very sheltered and very aggressively. And then after they left, we kind of broke that down and let them actually, breathe. They were a lot more um, open, and they were happy. But after they had left, me and my coworkers stayed inside the our place of work, and for a whole week we couldn't talk to anybody, because what they had left there was like this, like resonating, like energy of like just being oppressed, and like all this like guilt and like this negative energy. And we literally like could not work, we couldn't speak, and we were so drained for a whole week. We almost felt like we were sick. But again, that's the whole thing of the spiritual energy and how the spiritual warfare is always at play. So I agree with you on that. Yeah. We have another question here. Can you tell us what the International Youth Council is doing now?
Yeah, so the IYC, it currently suspended all of the programming that we had previously had. It really, a lot of the stuff that we were doing required us to be in person with one another. And like right now, no one's traveling, no one's going out to community events. And so, I mean, I've heard it's better in Canada, but for those of you who don't know, it's a shit show here in the US. And yeah, we really are, it's a mess. I would probably say it's probably worse than it's being put out, to be completely honest. But COVID-19 has like severely affected the way in which we're working. And right now, a lot of our Southwest tribes are being completely devastated by the COVID-19 virus. And so some of our chapters have been actively working to provide PPE kits and just like basic essential needs for these folks that are there. This like this specific program that we have now, where we're sending PPE kits to folks, stemmed from honestly, we had like $5,000 that we just allocated to provide young Indigenous folks with small stipends if they needed them. And it kind of just snowballed from there and became like a much larger initiative that like a lot of our young folks are actively working on. And it gave a lot of people like the opportunity to just like be doing something during this time. And so it's been a really like positive and healthy thing for them. But outside of the COVID relief, we're really not doing a whole lot. We did get involved with Earth Guardians, who is currently organizing a live stream next week on August 12th called Vote for the Earth. And it is specifically to unite Indigenous sovereignty and Black liberation onto one platform, and talk about the importance and reasons why young Black and Indigenous folks may be or may not be voting, and why, so that we can begin to talk about like, what are the reasons why young folks aren't showing up? Like, what is the root reason, and why is it that you're not showing up? And to really begin to have those discussions and dive deeper behind civic engagement and what the future of civic engagement looks like to young Indigenous and Black leaders. So if you want to register for that, you can RSVP at votefortheearth.us.
Awesome.
Unmuted.
Yeah, it's unmuted.
Okay.
We have a well, I just want to touch on like what you were saying before, and I don't think people grasp that that kids have to go to like camps. Like there's camps that are set up just for frontline work, and like what you're supposed to do and what is safe and what's not safe. And it's just, it kind of blows my mind that we have that there's a such thing as like an activism training camp, because of the times that we're in, and that we have to send our youth, or we don't have to send our youth, but we're sending our youth to these camps to make sure they are protesting safely, and like different like ways to barricade, and like
basically preparing themselves for the retaliation. You know, we are the resistance, but they're the retaliation. You know, they're the violent ones, and so we have to prepare our youth just to be able to cope with it and be able to do things correctly.
Yeah, and that's definitely mind-blowing, and it's interesting to see our culture change and the way that our leaders are presenting leadership to our youth, to make sure, well, just like to make sure that it's okay to do these things, and like that has that ever happened before, you know? And it's just like, it's definitely something to think about, like that our culture is like changing and in that way, because this is so frequent, and it's that are like, I guess not protesting, but having to stand up for our water, for our land, for our human rights, is something that like we have to deal with in our lifetime. And just to have clean water, just to have just to keep the land that we do have. What we have next is a show. It's called, not a show, but it's a little screening, and it's called There's Something in the Water. I don't know if Hannah wants to show that. Do you have it, Hannah? Hannah is our tech person behind the scenes.
And she does a lot of good work.
She said that it's gonna be on soon. Yeah. But yeah, that's definitely,
there's this
something to think about.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about all the time. We have to fight just to exist.
Nova Scotia, Canada's ocean playground. In some ways, Nova Scotia is the embodiment of what many view Canada to be, a sweet escape. But when you look beneath the surface, the picture-perfect image begins to crack.
Environmental racism is a problem. In Canada, your postal code determines your health. So we know that where you live has bearing on your well-being. Indigenous and Black communities are the ones that tend to be located near hazardous sites.
When we got here, they decided they were going to put a dump where everything went. There was body parts, there was food, animals, anything and everything.
There was concerns about the impact on the environment.
That's what our community smells like.
In one view, in one instant, you'll realize why we are here.
How environmental racism has affected this community. It's killing us. This lady's husband died of cancer. All the family that lived in this house died of cancer. This man has cancer. Who knows which in our water?
The trust has been broken through several governments.
Talk to us!
Step back or you're going to get arrested.
You are poisoning our water.
It's just another example of their disregard for our rights.
They're doing it, and they're not even tricking us. They're just doing it now.
Canada is not a nation. It's a corporation.
And it's time for it to stop.
The bottom line is that we're sick of being sick. We hope to heal from all this.
Awesome. That looks amazing.
Yeah, that's a show on Netflix, and it talks about, I was on a panel with the director, and we talked about how, about environmental racism, that it's not like a coincidence that they, well, for example, here in Six Nations, it's not a coincidence that we have a dam that stops all of the flow of the Grand River, and there's 40, how much, Charles? I think you said that there's 42 sewage systems in the Grand River, and we are downstream from that. So it's keeping all of that water here in Six Nations, and it keeps it stagnant, which means it doesn't get to cleanse itself. And so like that, it's not really a coincidence that that's happening, and that's part of environmental racism, or that like there's tons of different dumps near it. For example, in Akwesasne, there's a radioactive dumping grounds like right outside Akwesasne territories that I went to a meeting to, and that's what they were saying. And all of that has gone into the water, which then contaminates the fish, and a lot of people got sick around there. But they're making sure that, I mean, it's not a coincidence that they're making that it's there, and it's by Indigenous communities, by Latino communities, by Black communities, like in the film there. So yeah, it's definitely a problem that we have, that a lot of Indigenous communities are facing. I bet you almost everyone is facing some kind of
environmental racism.
Yeah.
Not only is it environmental, it's also systematic racism. It's genocide, basically. It's continually perpetuating. And a lot of these different events that are going on right now, they're basically being woken up. And that's what we're really trying to, push through this podcast, is that we want people to wake up and actually realize, even if it is, you don't have anything to do, but there is always something for someone to do, and there's always something that needs to be done. So I just, this is why I kind of joined too, right? So, because I knew this was important, and I knew that this is gonna go somewhere, and somebody was gonna do something based off like what we say here. And me and my other my other coworker, Mr. Girdo Deer, me and him have been talking about this for so long, and then now it's like basically, how do you say, like everybody's doing it. So that's like a good thing. So I think that's pretty good. But
yeah, and Girdo, but his coworker, is one of the most knowledgeable people on our reserve about the environment. Has crazy amount of knowledge. It's insane.
He's an actual environmentalist. He used to work with the archaeological digs, and when they would clear off land, he would go in there and he would look through all of like the land that they were clearing, and he would make sure if things were indigenous or things were Eurasian in origin. And a lot of times they would give him a date to go there to go inspect the site, and they would go ahead and clear the whole entire site like 3 or 4 days beforehand, and they would do that on purpose. And he would have to argue with the people that were the higher ups, but the people on the ground is the people that he wants to educate, because he calls them the cowboys. The people on the ground put the boots on the ground there because they go ahead and just do whatever anyways, because all they see is our land and profit, basically. But
yes.
He's really good.
So we have another video, and it's called "They Have to Kill Us" by Neon Natives. Hopefully Hannah can put that one down.
And that's another little digital story we have here, and another
by Neon Natives. Yeah. It's
here we go.
In these United States of America, this great country of ours, we American Indians, we can be anything we want to be, except American Indians.
So you're telling me that Indigenous people who protest pipelines for the sake of the environment, their sacred land, as well as their sacred way of life, are going to be met with rubber bullets, dogs set on them, pepper spray, and water hoses, as well as arrest? Those Indigenous people were unarmed.
We fought in your wars in other countries. Our Navajo Nation code talkers saved this nation in World War II. We have the inalienable right to joint venture with whom we choose, as long as we do not harm nor commit fraud upon anyone.
We suffer political oppression, economic exploitation, and social degradation. All of them from the same enemy. The government has failed us. You can't deny that. Anytime you live in the 20th century, 1964, and you walking around here singing, "We shall overcome," the government has failed.
You think that we are wrong? You think that we are talking unrealistically? Then go look at your elders and see what has happened to your elders in your machine-age society. See what kind of respect that they get. See what kind of a voice they are allowed into your society. What kind of input they have. What is racism? Racism is an act of war. Sexism is an act of war. It's a war against our human dignity and our rights to self-respect. This is the war that they wage there. It's war. They are war rights. And we have to understand that the American corporate state got to where it's at through the act of war. The next war that you better be concerned about is the one that they're going to fight here in the continental United States.
To me, this is something that has to change, and when there's significant change, and I feel like that flag represents what it's supposed to represent, and this country is representing people the way that it's supposed to, I'll stand.
We are supposed to be citizens of the United States of America.
Well, they're gonna kill you if you stay here. Now, come on, let's go. Or sometimes they have to kill us. They have to kill us. Because they can't break our spirit. It's in our DNA. Because they can't break our spirit.
1,500 people were inside the large dark facility that's divided into separate wings for unaccompanied children, adults on their own, and mothers and fathers with children.
Charge the cops. Do your job. Do what you say. This country is supposed to be about the land of the free for all. It has not been free for black people, and we are tired.
There's a way to live with Earth.
Don't talk to us about looting. Y'all are the looters. America has looted black people. America looted the Native Americans when they first came here. So looting is what you do. We learned it from you. We learned violence from you. We learned violence from you. The violence was what we learned from you.
We choose the way of Earth. They have to kill us.
There's racism here. That's what we're standing against. That's what we want change for, and that's why they're walking with us.
Amazing. Amazing.
I literally
strong,
got
powerful
goosebumps when
video.
she's like, "We learned the violence from you." That just gives me goosebumps every single time.
Amazing. How true words. Every single one of those people. A strong voice and individual.
Yeah, so leading into that, we have our next speaker, and his name is John Williams. And he's done a lot of work with McMaster and Six Nations Indigenous youth. He's an ex-CFL player for the Hamilton Ticats. And he's pretty cool. You want to introduce yourself a little bit on the things I missed?
Yeah, can you guys hear me there?
Yeah,
Yes, we can.
Hold on a sec, my screen went down. Here I go. Here we go. Yeah, no, it's a pleasure to be on the show. I was saying before the show how much chemistry these two have. It's like you two are a natural fit together. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, you know what, that video, I'm right with you there. It gave me goosebumps. You know, some of the images, and what a lot of people don't understand too is those, you know, those stories, those images, those are the, you know, things that we talk about generational trauma, right? Those are the things that we've been saying for, you know, hundreds of years. But first of all, I just want to say big ups to you guys for, you know, taking advantage of this platform and speaking knowledge, because I think, you know, one of the biggest issues that we have nowadays is that telling the truth, right? And for such a long time, you know, our stories weren't told. So to be able to have a platform like this and get that kind of knowledge out, kudos to you guys.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Well, it's great to be here. You know, it's funny, like as much stuff as I do, you know, away from athletics, you know, that's the first thing people always go back to, but it's all good. You just got to take advantage of your platform. Yeah, I played close to 10 years in the Canadian Football League. Yeah, which was an experience in itself. You know, came on it naturally. My father was a Canadian Football League player for 8 years as well. He's from Denton, Texas. He came up here in about 1968, so he's been up here for quite a while. But yeah, after I got done playing football, like Kasha was saying, I played for a number of different teams. Started out with the BC Lions. You know, went to Edmonton for a little bit. You know, Toronto for the majority of my career, and then wound up back home in Hamilton. So had an opportunity to travel around Canada, meet a lot of people, have a lot of great experiences. After I got out of football, I was a youth worker, did that for a couple of years in the city of Hamilton. Worked for a program called the John Howard Society and a program entitled NRAC, which was stood for Non-Residential Attendance Center. So, I had, a majority of racialized youth that I worked with, that had gotten a little bit of trouble and worked a little bit of life skills programs with them. After that, did some work in Brantford at a place called Nova Vita Domestic Violence Services, where I was a domestic violence counselor. It was a women's shelter. Spent some time there. Back to the city of Hamilton. My career just kind of goes up like this. Back to the city of Hamilton, and got back to my roots, where I was the manager of community relations for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. So got a nice little, balance between being able to work in the community and then, come back to athletics a little bit. And then after that was when I made my way over to McMaster University, where worked in Indigenous Student Services on a program that was actually the Canadian chapter of a larger program called the Youth Movement. And the Youth Movement began at the University of Oregon and was inspired by Nike and Seven, and a young man wanted to do more for the Native American community. So what he did is created something called a field day, which basically kids from Native American kids from all over the state of Oregon got to come to the campus for the day. And then they got that, they got knowledge on, athletics, they talk about education, got to be able to talk about culture. So again, it was a nice split. So, I kind of looked around Canada and thought, why isn't somebody doing something similar to that, especially because there were so many chapters. I mean, there's one at, University of Oregon, Oregon State. We got one in Oklahoma, OSU, Stanford, but nobody was doing it in Canada. It's when I reached out to the McMaster University and said, well, why don't we do a field day of our own, and did that for about 3 years. And, I think the biggest problem is, a lot of the times with these larger institutions, right, when they talk about diversity and inclusion matters, they want to do something big, something present, something that, is front of a lot of cameras, but what they don't consider is the sustainability of these programs, right? And culture happens over, a period of time. It's not something that you can, fix 1 day, 2 day, that kind of thing. But yeah, we were able to do a number of different programs during my time there at McMaster. We did a program called As If, which stood for Access to Sport for Indigenous Females. And we bring young girls in from the Six Nations community. And we talk about, what you go through in the day in the life of a student athlete. I think a program like that is very important because when you look at, an Indigenous woman, at an institution at that size, they're really, triple minorities. You're a woman, you're a student athlete, right? And you're coming from somewhere that, you're coming from, the Six Nations territory. And the same with a lot of, Black men and women, a lot of them, it's an eye opener when they get to a institution the size of, McMaster University or a larger university. And I myself, as a, racialized student athlete, I was a triple minority myself. So I had some experience with that. I was, went to the University of Rhode Island. I was a Black kid on a predominantly white campus. I was a student athlete and I was an international student. So I definitely had some challenges to deal with.
Yeah, I definitely can relate to that because I was on the McMaster lacrosse team, me and my friend, who she's also Indigenous, and we didn't, it was really funny how we were treated because you wouldn't expect it because we were so close, but I don't think that we were treated like the other girls. We were definitely singled out, and like we didn't make the championship because it was around exam time, and they didn't invite us to dinner. They blocked us from the group, from Facebook group, and they blocked us from like the Snapchat group, and they like it was only me and her that were experiencing that, and we weren't invited to like the award ceremony. Like we were just totally, and we went to every single practice and every single game, and we weren't able to make that, and that's like what they did, and I thought that was really weird that they did that.
Yeah, no, that doesn't surprise me in the least. And I think, part of the reason why I created the youth movement was, it's not a one size fits all approach with each individual that comes to, the school. And I think a majority of the time universities view it as that. We each have individual experiences and are coming from different communities, right? So, it's not the same. My experience is not the same as yours is going to be. And, so part of the reason for creating, the youth movement in McMaster too, was to try to create more access, more recruitment, and more retention of some of these, Black and Indigenous athletes. And when you look at, a school like McMaster, which is very diverse, has a very diverse kind of like, student base. But then when you look at something like an athletic department, well, probably, less than 5% of those student athletes are Black. How many, Indigenous student athletes? Probably less than 1%, right? And I think a lot of the times those administrators don't think about those kinds of things. And that's when, diversity comes into play. When you look at, some of these athletic departments, and I know it's not just McMaster, it's happening all across Canada, where you look at the athletic department and you look at the administrators, they all kind of look the same, and, diversity and equity is about having those voices in that room, right? So they can talk about different experiences, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. Because even in my little experience of being a part of lacrosse associations and stuff like that, all of the Indigenous voices were always in a separate room, and we could talk to each other in circles for hours, but it only was one person that come from outside that was actually a part of like who would mandate all of like the funding and everything. They would come inside and only talk to one specific person, and it was the person that agreed with them on everything. And I really like what you're doing. You're given an opportunity to where there once was none. You're given an opportunity to people from all different backgrounds. It doesn't have to be just Indigenous or Black. It can be anybody who has a sort of disadvantage. They're all treated the same, and that's what I really like to I like to see that, and I like to hear that all of that stuff is being more and more embraced and then created, and all those creative thoughts and all those voices always lead to something that is a lot bigger than all of us. That's a lot bigger and a lot greater than what we could even dream of. This is just like a spark. It'll inspire somebody. That's like what I was saying earlier about this podcast. It's really just inspiration. Somebody who's just listening or whatever. Maybe someday somebody listening is going to do something great. So I really like what you're doing. It's awesome.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
And
how did you get involved in like Six Nations and in other Indigenous communities, working with Indigenous youth there?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of gain a deeper knowledge of my ancestors. My great grandmother was Afro-Indigenous. She was a woman of Muskogee Creek descent, and I'd always felt kind of drawn to the photo of her. And that was really the spark that kind of, lit the fuse right there. And then after that, when I worked for the Hamilton Tiger Cats, I had an opportunity to come up to Six Nations to take part in a football camp that was being put on by a man by the name of Jim Warren. And Jim is Oglala Sioux from South Dakota. He's a former football player like myself. This guy is right out of Central Casting. He's about 6'7". just enormous, right? And has the character to go with it. But what Jim does that's really great is that he runs these warrior camps, right, all over the U.S. and in Canada. And part of what he talks about is not just football, but he talks about life skills. And that automatically kind of drew me not to just Jim's work, but to the Six Nations community. And I had an opportunity to also go down for the last 3 years or so down to Cattaraugus territory and down there. Yeah, and work on the Seneca Res down there. We did we do our Haudenosaunee life skills camp put on by the Grandma's Club every year, right? Obviously, it got canceled, through COVID this year, but and then Kasha's mom, Dr. Dawn Hill, she was the one that really kind of legitimized me in the Six Nations community, and then through her had an opportunity to go to Lubicon, in Little Buffalo and that community out in northern Alberta, and do more of the same kind of work, talk about, sports camps. But, I think a large part of the time is, we look at some of these, Black athlete activists, and we don't consider, Indigenous athletes and the work that they're doing in the community, and there's so many of them. And part of what I'm doing is trying to create a platform too for, the younger kids to be able to speak out, right? Because, those issues are, different than, a lot of times in other communities, right? So I always talk about being an Indigenous athlete activist, right? You look at individuals like, whether it's like the Thompson brothers or, there's so many Indigenous athletes that are out there and have a platform to be able to speak. And what I want to do is kind of raise more awareness to the younger generation, just let them know they have a voice too, right? And much the same as me, I've been able to kind of use my voice and my platform and to be able to speak out on issues that are kind of around Black and Indigenous communities.
That's awesome. You want to
Black Lives Matter?
Yeah. Can you speak just a little bit about the Black Lives Matter movement and some of the systemic racism that, we've all experienced, but, we would like to get a little bit of your own personal thoughts and maybe a little bit of your own personal experience as well. If it's, you don't have to go in.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you know what? I was thinking about it the other day, and it doesn't escape me that I'm only a couple generations removed from slavery. My grandfather was a sharecropper. my grandmother was a domestic. My father grew up in segregated South picking cotton, and there's a T-shirt that says, we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. And for me, that really sums it up. And, we've obviously been kind of dealing with these issues for hundreds of years. And so I think we're living in a moment. And, I think it's important that not just our voices get heard. I think it's important that we speak for, our ancestors that came before us and for our children as well. You know what I mean? And I do think that, I believe that, Black liberation is tied to Indigenous sovereignty. And I think that, when you talk about, Black and Indigenous solidarity, I think that is, one of the strongest kind of ties when you're speaking on the matter of white supremacy. I think that both pains can be validated at the same time working together. I think you're starting to see some of those things happen. You talk about in the sports world with the Washington Football Club, and you talk about Edmonton and them both changing their names. I think some of those things are starting to happen, but I think we still have, a lot of work to do. And I think that, obviously, I was involved in a documentary where I was, an associate producer on it called Gridiron Underground, it details Black Americans coming to Canada to get more opportunities. And one of those individuals was, my godfather, a guy by the name of Bernie Custis, who was, the first black quarterback to play in professional football. He also went on to, be the head coach in McMaster, had a lot of success there, but was an educator, a principal in Hamilton for over 30 years. And I look at some of those things, and I think we've taken some steps backwards. And I think it's up to, individuals like myself and the younger generation. I always say you got to figure out where you've come from before, you know where you're going. You know what I mean? And it's easy to touch the stars when you're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? So I think acknowledging and understanding the stories of those people that came before us plays a big role in where we're headed.
Yeah, definitely. We have a, you wanted to play Matt Dumba. Do we have a video of that?
Okay. You want to play it?
Oh,
you don't
we
have
do
to.
have a
I can
video.
just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Just give us a bit of the breakdown on some of the athletic activism.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, like the guy that kind of, set this all off, Colin Kaepernick, from the beginning, right? But when you even look at, athlete activism, you can take it all the way back to Muhammad Ali, guys like Jim Brown, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Bill Russell, right? All guys that were able to use their platform to be able to speak out on these injustices. But, you look at somebody like Colin Kaepernick, he obviously had to be the individual that fell on the sword. And I think people are, starting to come around, and, while he went through it, the message got hijacked, by Donald Trump, who called, these athletes taking a knee, all sons of bitches, right? Yeah. So you look at that, the president of the United States of America, the some strongest superpower in the world, right? And you look at, an act of, just taking a knee, and what that was all about, you know what I mean? And I think, people are starting to understand it, but you still have individuals that are trying to, hijack that message right there. And, you thank God for individuals. And I think a lot of athletes nowadays, whether you're looking at the NBA or, you're looking at somebody like Matt Dumba, the NHL, it's big time, and specifically in a place like, you expect those individuals to speak out in, leagues like the NFL and the NBA, where the athletes are over, 80% of the athletes are playing are black. But when you look at a league like the NHL, and, where it's like, 70% white, right? And for the most part, the first week and a half, of the NHL season, they were still standing, right? And this individual, Matt Dumba, he was the first hockey player to take a knee, right? So, a lot of it is the athletes, but what people don't understand, and I think they need to start thinking about too, is when you look at these huge corporations like the NFL and NBA and NHL, you look in the front office, how many white owners do we have? How many Black and Indigenous, individuals are working in the front office, so I think representation is just as important with some of those concerns. But like I said, we still have a long way to go. We still have a long way to go. And like I like to say all the time, what are you going to do next? I mean, I'm not huge or big on, these corporations putting out statements and saying, this is what we're going to do next. You know what I mean? And even like, some of the things that they're doing in the NBA, which is fantastic when you wear a jersey that says, say her name, when you talk about, Breonna Taylor. Yeah, Breonna Taylor. And, some of these other individuals, Ahmaud Arbery, right? George Floyd, you go down the list, right? But what are you going to do now? You know what I'm saying? Like, I think a big part of it is education, right? And I think some of these messages can't come from us. I think a lot of these messages have to come from, white educators, because we played that card. We went down that line, right? It don't work, right? So we need allies. We need individuals to stand, beside us, right, and fight for us. But it's athletics is, it's a powerful thing. You know what I mean? And I think these athletes have a platform, and I think for a long time they didn't really understand the power of that platform. But I think now athletes are kind of coming along, and they want to be known for, more than what they're just doing on the field and on the court, right? And I think now more than ever, we've kind of been empowered, and we have a moment to be able to share our stories. It's just, how are we going to do that?
Yeah. Mr. Kaepernick, he actually gave money to Standing Rock and to the Navajos as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was one of the big supporters of our movement as well.
Yeah,
And
he also goes every year. He goes to Alcatraz Island, and does the morning ceremony. Right. So
yeah.
he's really walking the talk. He started his nonprofit program called Know Your Rights, where he goes to these communities, and he brings in Black and Indigenous youth, and talks about, really educates them, right? He brings in somebody that talks about financial literacy, right? He'll bring in somebody that talks about health, right? He'll bring in somebody to talk about, what you do when you get pulled over by the police, right? We need more of that, right? It's
Yeah.
great, these signs where people are putting up and doing these things, but I mean, that's one individual that's really walking the talk right now.
Yeah, and that's why I think he got so attacked by the white American government, especially by Donald Trump, because he saw him as I would say like a different his own power, and he saw it as a threat to his own power. Yeah, and I really believe that's why he felt that sort of way, because he didn't want that. He just wanted people to say like, oh no, he's just a athlete and that's it. They're not allowed to have their own thoughts. They're not allowed to have their own opinions and stuff like that. And I really believe now, him using that platform is giving a lot of hope and a lot of encouragement to other people who have the same type of platform, to use it in a right way, not just an acceptance speech, like at the Oscars or whatever. Even back then, they were doing stuff then, but sometimes they don't have, all the answers, not like how Kaepernick is actually walking the walk, like he's out there on, and doing those different types of things, actually participating in the activism.
And this is the last thing I'll say, because I know you guys want to keep the show rolling, but I think a lot of times people think that you have to have these enormous platforms to be able to speak out on injustices that you see. And that's really not important. And that's what I try to tell, a lot of, Black and Indigenous youth, is that it's important to get out. If you have something to say, you don't have to have, 2 million followers, right? You don't have to be in the spotlight, right? You don't have to have a large platform to be able to talk. I mean, organize, mobilize, right? I think that's one of the largest things that we can do is to be able to come together, because we're all working kind of, in these different areas, right? To be able to mobilize and come together, right? And work on these issues together. I think that's a big part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you for saying those things, man. And for doing what you do. Yeah.
Thank you.
Tomas, did you have any questions for John at all? And yeah, John.
No, I just want to remind like all of our Indigenous folks, like it's okay to stand for Black lives. Like we can be, when we say Black Lives Matter, that doesn't in any way mean that Indigenous lives don't. It doesn't in any way mean that Native lives are any less than Black lives. When we say stop killing Black people, we are also saying stop killing us too, because you're killing us too. And we can actively enhance and participate in the Black Lives Matter movement without feeling that in any way we are hindering or taking away from our movement as well. That really our liberations are intertwined, that we, they're one, and in no way should we ever compare Black liberation to Indigenous sovereignty. And also reminding ourselves that there are Black people in our communities. There were Black people here on Turtle Island prior to European contact. To say that these two great nations didn't know one another or that they didn't know who they were, but yet they had some of the most advanced societies that the world has ever seen is absolutely ridiculous. And when I think of like the word decolonizing, I think people think like it means, oh, I need to be nice to everyone all the time and like not vote. No, that's not what decolonizing to me, I guess, means. To me, decolonizing is reestablishing those ties, is understanding that no, we weren't just feeble natives waiting for, the Europeans to come help us. No, we were the empire of this hemisphere. We were equal to Greece, to Egypt, to all of these great civilizations, and we knew one another, and we need to come back to that point, decolonizing the way in which our relationships are with one another. And so I'm really honored to I'm really honored to be an Indigenous person that fights for Black lives, and I will stand for my Black community until the day that I die, because we don't really go by blood quantum all the time. Like most of the times we do it by hunkapi, which means we define who our family is, we define who our tribe is, we define who our people are. We don't wait for the government to tell us who our people are. And if you ask me, Black people are my people. That is my family. Who has made me who I am today. And I feel like I am indebted to my sisters and brothers because of the beautiful sense of self that they allowed me to have growing up. And so I try to say that to all of Indigenous folks, that's really what I want us to really jump behind this, and what we want from other communities, we should give to other communities.
Yeah. There's a good quote from this comedian, Charlie Hill. He's Oneida. I think he's from, I think he might be from Oneida, London. And he was talking about in his stand-up routine that he said, well, if it was up to us, Black people wouldn't be the first person to go back. But it's not them, it's not them. Who would go back on the boat. It's not their fault. This Charlie Hill, of course, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but Charlie Hill is one of the greatest stand-up comedians from our reservation, and he went on the Richard Pryor show way back in like the 70s or 60s, around there. Yeah. He gave him his Indian name of Lahunji, which means a dark spirit, or like a person with darker skin. So so we've always had this really tight relationship between each other. We always understood each other. There was never a time where we couldn't get along, or we couldn't understand each other's struggles.
Yeah, and I like the part where you said it was like that we lived in like cities, and people think that we lived in like villages, which is like small, but like we have archaeological sites that are longhouses were like 3 football fields long, which is huge. And that, like, it's just amazing how big our cities were back then, and it make it seem like it was very small, and that we had small villages, but definitely
on
not Iroquois.
Yeah, on Manhattan Island there was a village called Seneca Village, and I think it was a bunch of like slaves that made a village there, and they bulldozed it to make the Central Park. And that was like at once an entire village of sort of a mixed people of Blacks and Indigenous folk, and they bulldozed it for no other reason than to have a park in the middle of their city. And people forget that all those big cities that were once wildernesses of like big sustainable forests, and there was people who knew how to live that way back then. So as long as we still have these people around, the right type of people who have the right type of knowledge and go about it the right way, that knowledge and that way of thinking is still going to be here.
Yeah, but we also have like really important allies that help us, for instance, with our water, like Charles. And who
Oh,
are
great transition.
Yeah.
yeah, I like Charles, who helps us with our water here in Six Nations, and he's an engineer, so he's the one who has the data and who's looking at all of the heavy metals that we have in our water. So he's very important to Six Nations and giving us knowledge on what is in our water and to keep our people safe. So Charles, do you want to introduce yourself for a little bit?
Yeah, great segue. Thanks very much, Makasha. I would like to make one small correction, though. As much as we can, it's not my data. It's absolutely First Nations people's data. And as much as we can, it's not my responsibility to try to figure out how to analyze or fix it. I'm there as in service to what First Nations people are interested in finding out, whether that's educating them on my techniques for analyzing water, whether that's my techniques for treating water, or simply learning how First Nations people would go about that themselves and trying to figure out how to adapt that to the current crises that we're in. So that's a small correction, but so this is the Science Minute. So as Makasha introduced, I'm Charles. I'm a professor of chemical engineering at McMaster University. I've got a lab at McMaster University, a bunch of grad students. I work under the Global Water Futures project, and that's a project that has linked me with Professor Don Martin-Hill. And between the two of us, many other professors in nursing, in biology, in psychology, in anthropology. And this multifaceted team has targeted or attempted to target how to or figure out what's happening on First Nations land, specifically with respect to their water. So moving forward, just a quick introduction about myself. This is my grandmother and my grandfather. I would say I come from a long line of strong women. My grandmother was very strong-willed, but also very brilliant. She was an early computer programmer, one of the first female programmers in Canada.
That's cool.
She was a scientist in our family, and she really paved the way for strong female leads. And moving forward, my mother, you can see where we get curly hair in the family. Picture there. That's my mother doing her PhD, which is a little bit different than mine. But she was also a very strong woman. She was not a scientist, but an anthropologist and an archaeologist, and spent a lot of time working with First Nations people, trying to help them with land claims, and worked on lots of land claim cases. So it was really heartening for me to hear that for the Haudenosaunee, women are the keepers of water. And women are really the ones who lead a lot of the environmental progress on First Nations communities. So it's sort of maybe coincidental, maybe just part of fate that the strong line of women continues in this environmental breadth. So the team that I help lead includes Makasha and her brother Cody and Denise McQueen. These are part of our community liaison individuals. They help us connect with First Nations at Six Nations. They help us work with the key people, key stakeholders. And on the second row are the collection of students that have done a lot of the data collection, a lot of the analysis. I'm just there as an advisor and really helping them along in their analysis. So we have Nan, Eric, Kyle, Hannah, and Panos. What's exciting, I think, and what's very opportune is that there's an equal mix of men and women on this team. So 50-50 split. What's a little bit problematic is that the lower line, Nan, Eric, Kyle, Hannah, and Panos, none of them are from Six Nations, none of them are First Nations themselves. And I would love to have or find First Nations engineers or scientists or chemists that are interested in helping with this project, because I think we can only do so much as allies. We've had great help with people that are from the reserve, but really building out that technical expertise is really what we'd like to provide for First Nations individuals. So bringing First Nations individuals on board, helping to disseminate our techniques, our information, is really a massive part of this effort.
So you're saying if there's any engineers, or who are you looking for?
That's right. So I'm currently hiring grad students for this project. And especially I'd be happy to find engineers, chemists, environmental scientists who might want to work in the lab, work in the field, learn how we analyze these samples in my lab. And really, I think an exciting way is to figure out, can we find mergers between traditional or Haudenosaunee ways of analyzing the environment and the ways that I've learned, my ways? Can we find some merger? Can we find some ways that can be really culturally appropriate? I think that'd be very exciting.
I'd be all for that. Sign me up for that.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, so if anybody has
my email and sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I'm saying if anybody has any friends or family who fit that description, then hit up Charles. You can go up to our Facebook page and say, hey, I have this family member who is doing that kind of work and maybe I can link you guys up. Then that could help.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so.
So what are we doing? So the first thing is, where are the water problems? Well, we know that there's lots of pollution happening in First Nations waters. Last count, there were over 100 communities still on boil water advisories and drinking water advisories throughout Canada. There are lots of cases actually where there's contamination, but it just hasn't actually been reported or identified and gone to the federal government. So there are probably even more cases than the ones I've just listed. So we know that First Nations are suffering from water contamination. And if you go forward, what we want to do is first identify what that contamination is. So the project that I've been working on is to help First Nations people. This is a little heavy metal joke. Help First Nations people figure out what's going on with their water, what the contamination might be. And once you can detect and analyze what's happening, then you can come up with a solution for that specific contaminant. So the first step is, let's analyze what the problem is. And the second step is, let's figure out a treatment or a solution to this problem. If we move to the next. So what are the problems that we run into? Well, first of all, it's not just the types of contaminants, which can be uncertain or varied. There are varying environmental conditions. There's an unknown, not just amount of contamination, but rate of contamination. And oftentimes this contamination, especially in First Nations communities, can be in very remote locations, so hard to get to. For example, another community that Professor Don Martin Hill is working with, the Lubicon in Alberta, way up in northern Alberta, is quite challenging to get to. And they have severe environmental contamination. So it adds an extra layer of complexity for scientists or engineers to work in those environments.
Yeah, because of the pipelines, right?
That's right, yeah. So there's lots of oil and gas fields nearby. And the strong suspicion, if not confirmed evidence, is that a lot of that operation is causing massive contamination to their environment, to their waterways. So those are some of the detection challenges that we run into. Thankfully, at Six Nations, that's a little bit easier. You're nearby, so we can start with this easier community, figure out what's happening with this First Nation, and hopefully expand some of those techniques to other neighboring First Nations and beyond. So for those that are not familiar, although I'm sure a lot of people know, the Six Nations is the largest First Nations community by population in Canada. They built a state-of-the-art water treatment facility back in 2014 for $41 million. This is an amazing, as an engineer, it's a great thing to see. It's a really high-tech type of water system. Unfortunately, there are two problems with it. One is it's currently only connected to 10% of the population, because that's the only amount of money that the federal government gave to connect the state-of-the-art water treatment plant to the community. So they have this beautiful water treatment plant, and yet it can only service a small fraction of the community. And approximately 90% of the other population on Six Nations Reserve relies on bottled water, cisterns, which are essentially concrete bunkers that people fill with water, or groundwater wells. So wells they have dug themselves or they've had contractors dig. You can see here in this photograph, this is a pretty traditional concrete well that you find across Six Nations and in many other rural communities, non-centralized communities across Ontario.
Yeah, do you want to explain how it's a human right that all people should have running clean water hooked up to their homes? Right now, yeah, definitely only 10% of Six Nations, like my home, is hooked up to the water treatment plant. So
Mine is as well.
Yeah, so we have clean water coming from our taps, but the other 90% of our Six Nations Reserve doesn't have that. So they also have struggles with paying for
the water to be trucked in,
to have the piping piped up to their house. So there's lots of
obstacles and different financial problems that always arise.
Yeah, like single mothers and elders can't carry a big jug of water into the house, right? So that is a struggle for our people here in Six Nations on a daily basis. Like we shouldn't have to like rely, like we don't know who's gonna, if someone's available to bring you water, right? And what their schedule is like. And so there's these stressors of every day trying to get clean water. And there's just people who asked on Facebook, hey, can someone bring me water today? And if nobody answers, then guess what? They're gonna
have no water.
They're gonna have no water.
Maybe for a week, maybe a couple of weeks. I know my auntie, she comes to my house basically on a daily basis to fill bottles up of water. So she have, water at her house just to clean herself with, not even to drink or anything. She needs it to clean herself or wash her dishes or stuff like that. And she comes in basically almost on a daily basis and maybe every other day to refill her water supply.
So I think you're making a really good point, which is a lot of people have a misconception that, well, you just get bottled water. What's the big deal? But you can't shower in contaminated water.
No, you can't.
There's not enough bottles of water available to pour over your body to wash. You can't wash your dishes or your apples in contaminated water. You can't have a home birth in contaminated water. And these are real daily hindrances for communities. And especially even if all the individuals on Six Nations or other First Nations communities had perfectly good well water, that doesn't necessarily mean that they want that source of water. Why couldn't they have the same ease or availability that might come to other municipalities? And I think what's lacking here is options. It's possible, and I know I've talked to some people at Six Nations that they don't want to drink the water from the water treatment plant because they observe it as overly chemically treated, and that's fine, right? But there are no other options. You either drive to a central depot and get this chemically treated water, or you're rolling the dice, drinking potentially contaminated well water. And so this is really the problem, that if there are no options on the reserve, then it really hinders people's livelihood, it hinders people's psychology, and it really is disruptive to community.
Before this treatment plant went up, everybody, had to have well water or had to go to the creek and had to boil water, and that was the way it was for a very, very, very long time.
2014 is not that long ago. That's years ago.
And before this, I lived off of that well water. I used to live on the corner there, and that's where we got our water, was from a well for the longest time. And everybody that I know, like basically like my age and older, they've all grown up on well water.
Yeah, that's again limiting options. So for a fairly large community, 12 to 20,000 or so people, that's a fairly large community to be living on individual wells. Communities of that size throughout Ontario will often have a maybe not a full water treatment plant, but a centralized well that's managed and connected. So that there definitely is a discrepancy between what's happening at Six Nations and what's happening at a lot of other communities around Ontario.
Yeah, and not only are we having to survive off of that, potentially contaminated water, but all of our fresh water, our groundwater has been stolen from us. Well, was up until Makasa put her foot down, and actually got things moving along in a positive direction. Not just having to go down and being stagnant. Like I heard this quote, staying still, is death. You always have to keep moving forward. And basically, she kind of was pushing us in the right direction. So, without these, outside influences or people, standing up for us, giving each other a voice, we'd still, have potentially contaminated water, and our groundwater or our well water, and having to pay, to have all that water trucked in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, these are really, these are pressing concerns. They weren't, problems back in the 70s. These are problems happening currently. And again, it's not just Six Nations, it's First Nations across Canada that are experiencing this kind of variable drought, in their homes. So we go to the next slide. We learned that Six Nations and a lot of other First Nations have water quality concerns. And mostly that was concern around groundwater wells, but also concerns about natural waters flowing in and around the reserve. And in this exploration of water on the reserve, we found not just problems with the major river that flows through the Six Nations Reserve, which is the Grand River, not just people as well as cisterns, but also other smaller creeks that flow through the reserve, which have very high concentrations of bacteria and potentially other kind of contaminants. So again, this is an example of environmental racism. It's not a coincidence that First Nations communities often have much worse water quality than a lot of other communities. It's not a coincidence that First Nations communities have poorly functioning wells or wastewater treatment plants. These are actually at the best case scenario, neglectful, and the worst case scenario, intentional disregard for people's livelihood. So you can see here some outlay pipes which have poorly treated water flowing into a creek on the reserve. You can see another picture, people's groundwater wells, and down at the bottom is the picture of the First Nations, Six Nations Reserve, with that blue line on the top, the Grand River flowing past it or through it. So the first thing we did was we analyzed people's groundwater through their wells and cisterns. So you go to the next slide. What we found was pretty concerning. We sampled a pseudo-random selection of wells, primarily from people volunteering to have their wells and cisterns checked. We measured people's tap water, people's water directly from the wells, people's water from cisterns. And what we found was both contamination from bacteria, and that'll be discussed by the biologist if she comes on for this Let's Talk About Water. And my team discovered not just contamination by bacteria, but also contamination by heavy metals. One of the major concerns was mercury contamination. In one of the worst wells that we analyzed, there was over 8 micrograms per liter of mercury. And the Canadian national guideline is less than 1 microgram of mercury per liter, absolute maximum. So one of these wells had 8 times the amount of mercury. And what we analyzed was, of all the water sources we sampled, over 30% had mercury near to or above the guideline. So you can see this map of First Nations, of the Six Nations community. All the red dots are wells or locations where water sources had higher than guideline mercury levels. All the yellow dots were near to those limits, which is still unacceptable. And in fact, these limits for mercury are somewhat arbitrarily determined. They're determined by a few scientific papers, and we set a limit that's sort of reasonable to treat in the rest of Canada, which is less than 1 micrograms per liter. And some of this is, of course, this is based on scientific evidence and scientific analyses, but really this is all the red and yellow dots that we measured, all the wells and cisterns that we measured had totally unacceptable levels of consistent mercury. And mercury is a problem because it's a toxic heavy metal. So it can cause neurological damage over prolonged exposure. It can cause problems with your nervous system. And over a single dose is not going to kill you, but prolonged exposure over the course of a lifetime, or even less than that, over several years, can cause significant health effects. So we wanted to go back and reassess these wells, find out if the mercury concentrations were fluctuating, if they were changing, and then analyze other people's wells. Unfortunately, COVID interrupted some of those analyses, but we're starting those analyses up again as soon as we can, hopefully in August or this month or maybe in September. And what we really need is people to allow us to come in, take samples from their taps, take samples from their wells and cisterns, and let us know if they know of any concerns with their water, if they have any concerns with their water. That will really help us to do a fulsome analysis. And we can share that data with anyone that's volunteering. And we've shared this data with Band Council already and with the Confederacy. And we are very concerned about these results. But it's not just all bad news. We want to now, next stage, figure out how can people treat this water? How can people start finding alternative sources of water that would be better? And what are some local techniques or technologies that we can start brainstorming to treat and filter this mercury out of people's water? And then the next question is, why is there mercury on the reserve? So if you go to the next slide, again, this is a really nice example of environmental racism. The river flows down, so just to stop here in the slide, the river flows down, the Grand River flows down from north to south through much of Ontario into Lake Erie. And you can see that it flows past a bunch of large cities. Flows near to Guelph. Guelph has an estuary that combines with the Grand River. Flows by Waterloo, Kitchener, Cambridge, Brantford, and eventually, in the next click, flows past Six Nations of the Grand River. So really, Six Nations is at the tail end, at the bottom of a lot of industrialized cities. And all of these cities are dumping wastewater into the Grand River. All those green dots on that map represent wastewater treatment plants that spill their water into the Grand River. Now, that wastewater is treated for the most part, treated up to a level that we've deemed as a Western society to be acceptable for releasing into an environment. But what they don't tell you very often is that under rainstorms, under large water events, like a heavy rainstorm or a storm, a lot of raw, untreated sewage will be dumped into the river because they overflow the capacity of the wastewater treatment plant. And so for the past, this is a very, what you can see is this is a very industrialized river. It's been treated basically like a garbage dump for 100 years. Only in the 70s and 80s have we started to treat water that's flowing into the Grand River. And yet our current technologies don't treat all the wastewaters that are flowing into the Grand River. We still have these overflow contamination events. And all that is flowing right past and right through the Six Nations Reserve. And again, it's not a coincidence that we don't care what we dump downstream of our neighbors. And especially if those neighbors are poor or Indigenous or Black or otherwise marginalized, there's even less of a care if you dump poorly treated water into those important riverways. And I think what's really a travesty, I mean, if that was enough to break someone's heart, what's really a travesty, I think, is how important water is for the Haudenosaunee. In this project, I've learned really intimately, not just for the Haudenosaunee, but for a lot of other First Nations groups, how important water is to their culture, to their spirituality, to their everyday life. And if you then contaminate this water such that you divorce those peoples from this life source, from this lifeblood, you tell them, oh, by the way, sorry, we contaminated it. you can no longer use it in the way that you wanted to. You can no longer fish there. You can no longer swim there. That's another way of rupturing a culture, another way of, whether it's intentionally or not, again, in the worst case, it's entirely negligent. In the best case, it's entirely negligent. In the worst case, it's intentional rupturing of someone's culture. And I think a really nice point is, if you click on the next slide, if you overlay the Haldeman Tract, everyone knows at Six Nations what the Haldeman Tract is. It's a large chunk of land that was given or bequeathed to the Six Nations.
Oh, you can take it back. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I mean, it's land that was given to the Six Nations peoples, and for their honorable serving in the invasion of Canada by the United States. And if you look at the Haldeman Tract, what does it follow? It follows the entire length of the Grand River. So at one point, the Six Nations owned and ruled and controlled the entire Grand River. And again, I don't think it's a coincidence. One of the reasons I think is because the Grand River was so important, so critical to the Haudenosaunee way of being. And for us to have contaminated that so detrimentally, in fact, the Grand River was one of the worst, most contaminated rivers in all of North America up until a decade or so ago.
Wow.
And for us to do that is really tragic.
That's a lot of rivers.
Yeah, there's a lot of rivers in North America, and this was one of the worst. On par with the river that lit on fire in Cleveland.
Wow, that's crazy.
Thankfully, in the past 20 years or so, there's been the Grand River Conservation Authority, the GRCA, the Grand River Conservation Authority, which is made up of allies along this Grand River, from Waterloo, from Kitchener, from Paris, from Cambridge, really trying to clean up the river. They put sensors up and down the river to track contaminants. There's been lots of pressure to try to clean up the city's wastewater treatment plants. So there is lots of progress, but the progress is not done. It's not over. And Six Nations has a huge part to play in bringing awareness, in developing their own technologies and methods to clean out that Grand River, and really being leaders in how to teach us how to treat our environment properly. So that's the project. So if you're interested in how to analyze the contamination on First Nations land, if you're interested in figuring out where that contamination is coming from, and then probably equally as important, developing culturally relevant technologies to try to treat that contamination, it's important to contact Makasa, contact Professor Martin Hill, or contact myself. I think Hannah is going to put up a Facebook link if you want to be involved in the water survey. Please, this is a community effort, and it's a really critical effort, both to bring awareness and to bring knowledge about how best to remediate our environments so that they can be used with care and respect in the ways they were supposed to be.
Well, we got you here, Charles. We just want to invite all of our other guest speakers on to see if there's any other questions or.
Well, even our audience, like if we have any live audience that have any questions for Charles or for John, but Tomas had to leave, so he's not with us right now. But if you have any questions for our guest speakers, we can look on the live feed right now. So if you're watching, I see that there's 14 people.
If there's any other questions for our guest speakers here, please put them down in the comments.
Yes, comment them, and then we'll ask them for you here for Charles.
Yeah. Thanks, though, Charles, man. That's really great information. I really enjoyed listening to that.
Yeah, so did I. I learned lots of. Oh, I didn't realize that the Haldeman Tract was right over the Grand River.
And yeah, it
And
follows the entire length.
yeah, that's definitely something new I learned, because I didn't realize that. Although I should have, because they say that the Haldeman Tract is at the mouth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of the
You
source.
go from the mouth to the source.
But like to see it, is different.
It was delegated through all the different our different tribes of people, and what I learned is that they would put their gardens and stuff across the river from their village sites. So they would actually cross the river to go and harvest all of their crops and stuff like that. And so I found that really interesting as well. Me and my coworker were discussing, a different couple theories that we had on why they would do that, and a lot of them came up as sort of plausible and like what we would think, but nothing really too solid, to say, like this is why they did it, just sort of like different reasons, Been aware. No, really no questions coming up just yet.
Yeah, no questions. Yeah, there's one that's about that says that groundwater isn't good. And I think that to clarify, like with a lot of the wells on reserve, we found, or I don't know if that's, well, we did find that a lot of the wells on reserve were groundwater wells, and so that's why they were contaminated. But the well, or the water that Nestle was stealing and taking was the aquifer water, which is the 1,000-year-old or so water that is underneath that, right? So do you want to?
Oh, there's a question here.
Oh, there's a question.
Has there been any effort on behalf of politicians to support the work?
Well, the research is funded by the federal government, indirectly. So the money was given to McMaster, University of Saskatchewan, Waterloo, and University of Laurier. And then Don and some other professors and myself, we applied for that money to help support this work. So indirectly, the governments have supported us, the federal governments have supported us, but no direct, not directly, I would say.
Yeah.
So we are supported by federal funds, but it's not because of our project. It's because we were, and Don really was savvy enough to get those funds.
It's because my mom's brilliant. She knows what to say and how to weave through the system. But I doubt, like, if they knew exactly what we were doing, then it would not be supported. Right?
Yeah.
I can't speak. I don't know. I don't have the.
No comment on that one. Okay. But that's most likely how that one would work. How that would.
You're right in that the amount of talk far outweighs the amount of money. There's a lot of discussion that we have to help First Nations communities. A lot of discussion that we have to do this and that. But the money doesn't always follow, or the rational processes don't always follow, both to understand where that contamination is coming from, or to really fix, what I would say is a century's worth of contamination, environmental racism, and intentional degradation of the environment.
Yeah, I think it's all part of their thing to say, oh yeah, we did help you, we gave you this much. It's sort of like we did help, so our hands are off of it, right?
Yeah.
Sort of like around that thing. But we do have one more question here from Catherine. I'm curious if other contaminants were observed, nitrates, for instance.
So we know that nitrates and phosphates are going to be in the water, primarily because there's lots of that means farming, lots of farming happening upstream. We kind of know that because there's been lots of research happening in the Grand River observing nitrates and phosphates. We didn't focus on those contaminants in groundwaters. As soon as we started seeing heavy metals, we kind of diverted our attention because that was a very serious concern. But that is an interesting thing to look into. So we want to analyze everything. Again, the money is tight, so we have to be judicious about what we analyze. If you know of nitrate or phosphate contamination in people's water wells, that's a really important piece of the evidence, like a puzzle piece that we have to learn about. So please let us know about that if you have information.
All right, we have another question here. Along with the research, what legalities are happening to hold the waste management accountable with regards to the overflow?
Yeah, unfortunately, overflows are allowed by the federal government's wastewater regulation. They are fined, but it doesn't have a I'm not a lawyer, but I don't think it has jail time or doesn't have any kind of other repercussions. And really, wastewater treatment plants, their mandate is to minimize the amount of contamination entering the environment up to a limit. And those limits are set by the federal government's environmental water guidelines. So unfortunately, those overflows are permitted, and they are simply mandated to try to reduce the total number of wastewater overflows that are occurring.
I think that's it for our questions. Yeah. That's it for our questions.
That's all that we have in right now. So thank you, Charles. I think that you did really well in explaining on what's happening here in Six Nations. It's a huge issue that I think we need to focus on. Definitely. Right now we have a video from the Reclamation by Bev Jacobs. She has a few words to share with us, along with our clan mothers on the environment. Oh, we have another question. Do you want to answer this one real quick? Okay, so it says, what are the ways, apart from social media, that you are using to raise awareness on this issue? Would you be willing to speak to my class? Who is it?
Her name's Jelena Brezjonvic.
Apart from social media.
I would be happy to come to your class and give a talk about this. Is it a college course or a high school or elementary school? Either way, I'd be happy to talk about this. Really raise awareness. And I think what's actually exciting is brainstorm what is the future of water in Canada and for First Nations people here. Because what we're currently doing is not working. Essentially, the Canadian government and a lot of Western societies have these technologies, these large concrete technologies, essentially, to try to treat the contamination of the environment that's been happening for 100 or so years. Mm-hmm. And they only work in as much as they keep people relatively healthy from drinking water. But as you can see at Six Nations, it's not enough. It's not working in their wells. It's not working in their cisterns. The water treatment plant is working really well, but that isn't fixing the Grand River. So at a large scale, if we really think big, what is the way that we can reimagine our relationship with the environment? I would love to have people discuss that, debate that. And it starts with students. So I'd love to come into a class and help inspire, trigger ideas, trigger imaginations about what a new environmental relationship could look like.
As well as questions for Mr. Charles. Is there any questions for our other guest, Mr. John Williams?
Yeah, I don't know if I was clear in that. The questions are open to both of our speakers, John. And he talked about, if you have any questions about opening it up at McMaster, or if you have any questions about, like, if you're wondering how to get a hold of John at McMaster, maybe? What are some potential questions?
John, I've got, it's great to meet you, but I've got a question.
Absolutely.
It sounds like you're a really great organizer, community organizer, people organizer, especially around this field day on campuses. Can you imagine like an environmental day, like where a bunch of people clean up the creeks or clean up the Six Nations waterways, watersheds, like the Grand River? Can you imagine a way in which people get more involved with the environment, more connected with what's happening with their environment? I think both for the surrounding communities and for people at Six Nations, this would really bring together a population that relies on the environment.
No, yeah, I think absolutely. I think that would be a great idea. You know, in fact, the youth movement is kind of, we're obviously in a little bit of a hiatus right now with COVID going on. But, part of the reason why, I'm involved with this program is that, to bring to light these issues. And, you know, a lot of the times the reason why some of these athletes get involved with, you know, the issues is because they have a connection to it one way or the other. And I think, you know, environmentalism and, you know, the community of Six Nations, as in all First Nations communities, is all of our issue. So I would love to, you know, come together and maybe have some discussion on putting together a day like that. I think it'd be great.
Yeah, I think it would be really impactful.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the options that Jock had suggested. Our traditional knowledge holder here is that we have days or like days of the month that we go outside and we can clean up outside and make it part of our daily lives, instead of like one event during the year would be more effective.
You know, real quick, Kasha, you know, you just, you know, made me think about something is that, you know, a lot of these, you know, when we talk about reconciliation, you know, I think a lot of the challenges is, you know, these corporations have is trying to figure out how they get involved, right, in Black and Indigenous communities. I think they don't have enough knowledge around them or know enough people associated with them. And I think, you know, a lot of these, you know, larger, big corporations, organizations also have, you know, what they're calling now a corporate social justice kind of mandate where, you know, they're looking to get more involved. And I think everything changed, obviously, after like George Floyd, everything changed and is continuing to kind of evolve. And I think, you know, a lot of these organizations are looking for opportunities to come forward to help out, whether it's like financially or just a service thing. I just don't think that they know how to do it, right? And coming together, you know, over an issue like the environment that affects us all, I think it would be an incredible opportunity for people to kind of like, you know, get involved when you're talking about, you know, corporate social justice mandates that organizations have, and whether they're looking to get involved in, you know, systemic racism and health and education. You know, a lot of our issues too, you know, that I work with, you know, kind of around the youth movement is kind of like uprooting systemic, you know, racism in health and education. When you look at the health of, you know, Indigenous First Nations communities, you know, high obesity rates, right? Diabetes, heart disease, right? Not enough activity. I think those are the kind of things that we need to work towards, you know, and I think obviously when we talk about like environmental issues again, right? That's killing two birds with one stone, right?
Yeah.
You get out there, right? You get out into, you know, into nature and you get a little bit of activity as well, right? So I think those are the kind of issues that we have to also, you know, be cognizant and bring to the forefront with some of these larger organizations that are looking to reach out and become connected to our Black and Indigenous communities, right? The opportunities are out there. They just have to look for them too.
Yeah, it's connecting the right players. And I feel like you've got the connections.
I've got a few, right? But I would love to, you know, one of the things that I've been able to do too is becoming so involved with the Six Nations community, right? Is, you know, build those, you know, relationships. And I think, you know, when you talk about the difference between sympathy and empathy, a lot of the time is people don't understand that, right? When you're sympathetic and you're looking at some of the issues going on, whether it is with, you know, Black communities or Indigenous communities, you know, it's kind of easy to hit a sad emoji or leave a comment. But I think when you talk about empathy, it's putting yourself in those people's shoes and being in the environment, you know, in which some of these challenges exist, right? And in order to do that, you have to step out of your comfort zone and come out of your box, right? And take an opportunity to do something that you're maybe not comfortable doing. You know, I talk about, you know, there's a book that I read. I've read it a number of times, and you know, a lot of the times when, you know, this, you know, Black Lives Matter, you know, movement has been evolving and progressing, and we've been learning as we're going. Having a lot of white friends reach out and ask me, well, what can I do? What can I do? How do I go about it? That's not for me to say, but I will say that there's opportunities to educate yourself. And one of the things that I kind of bring forward is this book called Things That Make White People Uncomfortable. And I kind of resonate towards it because it's written by an athlete and an activist, the guy by the name of Michael Bennett, that stood alongside Colin Kaepernick. But the book is really all about, long story short, you have to have those uncomfortable conversations, right? You have to be in a room, you have to feel not at all comfortable in order to evolve and progress. And I think not just corporations, but individuals have to put yourself in those situations if we're going to move forward.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
I think that we're a little it's 8 o'clock now, so I think we should watch our video. Like I said about Bev Jacobs, and she was at the reclamation site, and now she's going to be on the show soon. She's a lawyer. She's a really well-known lawyer. She's like really good lawyer at, I forget what the university's called, but here she is, along with our
women are reclaiming their voice and addressing the oppression. And I see it happening not only in our own community, but I see it happening across the world in many Indigenous communities.
As Haudenosaunee people, we need all the skills of all our people so that we can win these negotiations, get our lands back, do what we need to do to look after our environment, our culture.
They promised that as long as the grass shall grow, the sun shines, and rivers flow. And this is what we believe in strongly. And that's what I keep thinking, that no, we're there. We're using all that against him now. And I'm hoping and asking the Creator to help us, that he will not give us any more, push us anymore. This is it. We've had it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John and Charles, for joining us, and Tomas. And sorry, my mom's talking to me, but thank you so much. You have so much knowledge, and you're both great at what you do. And I just thank you with all the work that you do with Six Nations and for other communities.
It's been an honor to be on the show. Thanks so much, Makasa. And good to meet you, John.
Good to meet you guys. Thank you again.
Thank you, guys.
I think we have
the music video now is the last thing to wrap up our show.
Yes.
Hey, can I drop a pitch in here real quick?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I've been working the last couple weeks on a farm on 6th Line. It's right off the Grand River. A friend of mine by the name of Denise Miller, her father. Her father just started. It's his land, but he just planted a whole crop of vegetables, right? And I know, like, every once in a while, he's looking for volunteers to come out there. But Denise just started an Instagram site, and it's called Revitalizing Our Sustenance on Instagram. All right, so go and give it a follow, check it out. Her father, Rick, he was in the services for a number of years. He was a Mohawk iron worker, and now he's kind of taken it upon himself. And all the profits for the vegetables go to, I believe, Lower Cayuga Longhouse. All right, so Roger Silversmith is out there quite a bit too. So if you're interested, hit up Denise Miller or Revitalizing Our Sustenance on Instagram to get more information.
All All right.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
All right.
Thanks for being here. Now we can go into our music video.
Week's video.
They call it a pipeline, but those on the front lines know that black snake was sent for us to grow, to shed the skin our ancestors pray, of wounds old and calloused, so that we may stay, so that we may unite, unity our tool. No weapons are found in this court of rule. Men becoming ki'ai, steadfast in their guard, protecting women's hearts as their song become roots, roots to cast out healing for all sentient beings, to honor sacred mother, heart forward we heal. The salmon will run, the Mauna will breathe, the rivers will flow. The rainbow is here and prophecy tells us all generations will hear.
Stand up with the First Nations and our people that been living here for thousands of years. Stand up. We've been fighting for our freedom since the Nina and the Pinta and the Santa Maria. Stand up. Like Geronimo, Sitting Bull, Red Cloud, Crazy Horse, Leonard Peltier. Stand up. Now they poisoning the waters for our sons and our daughters, so we on the frontier. We won. One nation, one cause, one people, one tribe. Now it's us against the pipeline. Get on your feet for Standing Rock, and we'll show you how strong we could be when we unify.
To all my native people, recognize yourself, keep your head up. To all my tribal people, recognize yourself, keep your head up. To all my native people, to all the original people, to all my indigenous people, recognize yourself, keep your head up. Stand up, 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 stand up.
From the beginning we was winning this game on planet Earth. It's been spinning, we've been living and dying, but giving birth the first of many nations. Celebrating them days when all that got made came after what God made. These days we cater to these internet memes, internet streams. It seems them streams aren't clean. I mean, we need the whole story seen where gasoline before water has gasoline in it. Malcolm X moment, Martin Luther King with a dream and war bone it. Wounded knee plus Alcatraz doggone it. This is for the rock with prayers we stand on it.
Oh yeah, we playing on it, the earth we camp on it. In a sweat lodge singing our songs with grandfathers. Heat rocks all in the spot, we splash on them with a beatbox from my boy we jam on it. Said a prayer for the black snake killers. Praying on the front lines, they are the realest. Stand for your people, stand for your family. Stand with Standing Rock, stand for humanity. Hey.
It takes a group of people who actually care about Mother Earth and life and water being sacred and the land being sacred to say, we stand up.
To all my native people, recognize yourself, keep your head up. To all my tribal people, recognize yourself, keep your head up. To all my native people, to all the original people, to all my indigenous people, recognize yourself, keep your head up. Stand up, stand up, stand up.
Net a wap was a cat, chicken tala, doggle, dogwa, the shutala, dilup, the lop, oh chitala,
Mini Wachoni, water is life.
Mini Wachoni.
Water is life.
Water is life. Water is life.
Water is life.
I stand.
I stand with Standing Rock.
I stand with Standing Rock.
I stand with Standing Rock. Stand up. Stand up.
Stand up. Stand up.
I stand with Standing Rock. Stand up.
To all my native people,
Woke up the giant, we won't go quiet.
to all my tribal people,
Don't mistake our peace as we stand defiant.
to all my native people,
It's the calm before the storm and I can hear it coming.
to all my tribal people.
I'm ready for the battle when we ain't running.
Stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up. Stand up, 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 stand up.
Standing rock, we're standing feet as history is on a sad repeat. Is it liberty or we just acting free as
our land depletes from these hands of greed. See, fate is found, how we face the hounds. Take a vow for these sacred grounds. Make a sound that'll shake them out. Say aloud, what can save us now? What can save us now?
Great. That's how we're going to end our show today.
Wrap up episode 3. Tune in again next week for episode 4.
Episode 4.
This is a 7-week series. We're on episode 3. So keep coming back. Keep tuning in. If you want to see more, come back next week.
And we'll be here. Me and him will be here next week and a few weeks after that.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
See ya.